Hello and welcome. My name is Melissa Favela and I am the community educator for Southern Caregiver Resource Center, where our mission is caring for those who care for others. Today, I bring you a very special topic that unfortunately is not as widely discussed or talked about, but we will be talking about it here today. So before we get started, make sure that you are comfortable, that maybe if you want to take notes, you have a pen and a notebook with you. That way you can jot down those notes. Or remember that this live stream will be available to rewatch right after we are done. So feel free to rewatch if you think you missed anything. So let's jump into our learning objectives for today. So as I mentioned, we do have a very special topic today. So we will be discussing the changes in roles and challenges in intimacy while caring for someone with dementia, because our topic is maintaining connection, dementia, and intimacy. So we will also learn various strategies when we're dealing with the challenges of intimacy and dementia, and we'll learn of other levels of intimacy and how to manage. Next slide, please. So, before we continue, before we jump in onto ways of how to maintain this connection of intimacy during dementia, I would like to start off with important statistics from a study called Caregiving in the US 2020, a focused look at family caregivers of adults 50 and older. This study is done by the National Alliance for Caregiving and the AARP Institute of Public Policy. So this study says that in 2020, approximately there were 43 million family caregivers. Out of those 43 million family caregivers, approximately 5 million care for a spouse or a long-term partner. Now, out of those care receivers, about 28% have a form of dementia. So this tells us that the need for this topic is there. Now, on another study, according to data by Kaiser Family Foundation Health and Retirement Study, approximately 18% of healthy spouse caregivers die before their partner with dementia. This means that caregiving increases mortality risks, even for healthy caregivers who start off caregiving completely healthy. So again, these statistics are there to make us understand that this topic is important. We need to acknowledge that caregiving is hard, but also we need to acknowledge that care partners or caregivers are also spouses, long-term partners, and they may be caring for someone who has dementia. So intimacy is a big part of those relationships. So let's continue with our next slide, please. Let's do also a little bit of a reminder of some of the common changes with dementia. And of course, these are just examples. They are not a complete list, but I do want to mention that as dementia advances, as it worsens, these changes and the challenges that go along with them grow. And I will expand a little bit more on each point because, again, forgetfulness is something, of course, very common in dementia. However, because today we are focusing on that partnership, on that intimacy, I will elaborate a little bit more after each point. For example, we know, as I mentioned, that forgetfulness is something that happens very often. It is somewhat of a trademark for dementia and different types of dementia. So when it comes to intimacy, partners may forget that they had recent sexual activity. They may demand more because there is this forgetfulness. There may also be from both the caregiver and the care receiver, maybe the replacement of the partner if that forgetfulness is strong. Also, the person with dementia, the care receiver, may not remember the life together. Or the feelings towards one another. So again, this forgetfulness can be a very big challenge in that relationship, that partner relationship, in that intimacy. So also grief. So grief is something that again can be applied to a lot of things, but grief when it comes to relationships, it could be experienced by the caregiver as a grief of losing their partner slowly and gradually to dementia. Anticipatory grief is something that happens, and we need to acknowledge the grief of I'm taking care of a person and now I don't see them as my partner. Right? And it can also be grief as the care receiver. Maybe they are aware enough that they are going through these changes, that they have dementia, that it is a condition that is just going to keep advancing. So of course they may also experience grief in I'm not myself anymore. My partner is now my caregiver. So how is this process, right? Well, maybe it's in the form of grief. Also paranoia. Paranoia can come as a form of accusations, distrust, right? It's something that we see from the person who has dementia, not acknowledging, maybe being suspicious of their partner. Also, hygiene, right? When it comes to intimacy and especially sexual intimacy, hygiene is something important. However, with dementia, we know that sometimes there is lack of awareness of hygiene. Therefore, some hygiene is not something central, right? Or maybe there just isn't such an interest in hygiene. So that is something to consider in practical ways. Also, aggression, right? When it comes to those partner relationships, aggression can be verbal, it can be physical, and it can come from both the caregiver and the care receiver. Okay, so this is, of course, something that is very important. We need to acknowledge it because it can escalate, right? So, again, just putting it out there, something to consider. And of course, sometimes with dementia, we see resistance, we see combative behavior. Also, I included loss here. Uh, Besides grief, yes, loss can also be the feeling of losing the relationship, of losing that person, right? But it could also be the loss of shared experiences. Dementia erases those experiences. It, of course, the loss of the intimate partner. So it's almost the loss of that person that you cared for, fell in love with, right? Now the relationship changes completely. So I like to acknowledge that caregiving is hard, as I mentioned earlier, but physical intimacy is one of the first things to change when we're caring for a frail partner, for a partner who has dementia, right? Why? Because all of these other things come into play. Practical things like hygiene, right? Practical things like eating on a day to day, right? Toileting, things like that. So, of course, physical intimacy may not be at the forefront, but it is something to consider. It is something to discuss. Next slide, please. So, again, why should we discuss dementia and intimacy? I already um, read the statistics that I showed you a couple of slides ago, but also because the care receiver may be stressed by the changes in their memory and their behaviors. As I said, sometimes the person with dementia does realize what they're going through here and there. So, of course, they may be feeling worry, anger, depression, low self-esteem. The care receiver may cling a lot more to their partner, so to their caregiver. and they eventually will become dependent, right? So this high stress can cause for the caregiver to pull away from their partner in both emotional sense and physical sense, right? And the caregiver may be frustrated with the demands of caregiving, and also that their partner is now experiencing constant forgetfulness. They have repeated questions and, of course, other behaviors. And most care partners, of course, they learn how to deal with these things. And it's possible, of course, it's possible, but it takes time, right? And before starting to work on this to get adapted to this new lifestyle, really, we need to acknowledge it, right? So it is important to acknowledge it, know what to do, understand what dementia is, and how that changes the relationship and the person that you care for. Because dementia, again, can change emotional, romantic, and physical connectedness. There are multiple planes in which we connect with our partners. So we know that dementia will affect all of those planes, right? Also, that intimacy changes may depend on the area of the brain affected by the specific type of dementia. I am not going to go into the different types of dementia in this presentation, but yes, there are different types of dementia, and depending which area of the brain is affected, we may see changes in intimacy. So I will discuss this in a little bit more detail in a few slides. But of course, we need to understand, just like everybody, people with dementia continue to need loving, safe relationships. And care partners may experience a range of feelings about continuing intimacy with someone who has dementia. It can be complicated. So it is important to discuss the relationship. If the person with dementia still has the capacity to discuss what intimacy will look like from now on, then we do want to discuss it with our partners, with our romantic partners. Now, it's also important to acknowledge that intimate relationships do not depend solely on sexual activity. Yes, it's a component, right? But really, relationships, as I mentioned, they are emotional, romantic, and physical, right? So it is important to discuss what is a priority, what is maybe something that we want to pay attention to, and what do we want to work on, right? If there is still that opportunity with the partner who has dementia. Partners need to start maybe thinking, as they say, outside the box, become more creative, and expand both their knowledge and understanding of intimacy to build upon and enhance the relationship. So what is intimacy to you? What fulfills you as a partner? So these are conversations that ideally are happening in any relationship, but when it comes to dementia and that aspect of change of caregiver and care receiver, but then we're also in a romantic relationship, these topics can be very tough. So it is important to consider them. And again, if there is the opportunity of still discussing this with your partner who has dementia, then why not? Now, in some cases, the dementia may already be advanced, so we may not have the opportunity to discuss it this way, right? So there are other ways in which we can still address these changes with a person whose dementia is already in the more advanced stages. Next slide, please. So let's focus a little bit more now on the changes and challenges in intimacy for the care partner, right? Because we know that dementia causes changes in both the caregiver and the care receiver. So the caregiver may lose interest in intimate activity. They may feel that their partner is gone, as I had mentioned earlier. This change may cause feelings of loneliness, frustration, and guilt. And it's okay to feel the feelings. It's care partners might feel that it's not okay to have sexual activity with someone who has dementia. The person with dementia might seem like a complete stranger. The person with dementia might seem to forget that they have a partner, a spouse, right? Or even how to be intimate. And the person with dementia may have even side effects from medications that can affect, of course, their sexual interest, their libido, etc. And of course, there may be changes in the brain, right? Memory loss, depression that also affect the interest in intimacy per se. Also, the care partner may feel exhausted due to all of their other caregiving tasks, as I mentioned. Usually, that intimacy need or that sexual activity is one of the first things to go because there are so many other things to focus on. And of course, as I had mentioned earlier as well, the grief over the changes in the relationship. This is something that we hear a lot. This is not the person that I married. This is a different person. Of course, we know that dementia changes, right? Right, changes the person, but we know that it is the disease causing these changes. So there are some tips, and again, we will discuss a little bit more of this in the upcoming slides, but it's important to start considering different ways of spending time together, focusing on other ways to show affection, such as snuggling, holding hands, spending time together as much as possible if that's something that brings a peace and satisfaction. So definitely things to consider and that we will further discuss in the upcoming slides. So next slide, please. So now we will focus on the changes and challenges in intimacy for the care receiver. So for that person, that partner who has dementia, that person who is receiving care. So the person with dementia may be stressed by the changes in their memory and behaviors. Again, this is considering that the dementia is in its early stages. They may feel worry, depression. They may fear the changes. They may feel anger and low self-esteem. These are all very common, a lot of emotions. They may become dependent and attached to their caregiver because of all of these emotions. And of course, as I mentioned, they may forget the life together that they had, the feelings towards their loved one. So most people with dementia still need to feel that they are cared for, that someone loves and cares about them. They may also need to spend time with other people other than their partner. And the efforts to take care of these needs for a person who has dementia, it takes work. Of course, it takes a lot of energy, but really we want to make them feel as safe as possible, as happy as possible. So it is important to let them know that we love them, that we'll keep them safe, and that others care about them too, right? This is, again, kind of going into another topic that we've discussed, but the importance of having a team that supports you, right? Someone who is there, they may not be the romantic partners of the person with dementia, but they may be, helping the caregiver, doing some of the caregiving. So it is important to have a team because that way we can reassure the person that others care about them, right? So again, some tips here are to, talk to a doctor, a social worker, a clergy member about these changes. Again, if it's still early on in the process of dementia, the person with dementia might be able to talk to these people and express some of the fear, the worry, the anger, right? Somewhere where they are safe to express what they're experiencing, what they're going through. Of course, it may feel very difficult, maybe awkward if we're also talking about sexual relationships. It may be awkward to talk about it, but it helps. We know that it helps. So, there are also options, for example, for the caregiver to talk things out in a support group, because we know in a support group that there are people who most likely have experienced something similar. Not the same, because we know that all of the caregivers experience caregiving differently, but it is this safe space to really explore what's going on, and maybe hear what others have done that has helped them. So definitely thinking about the positive parts of the relationship, thinking outside the box as to how we can tackle this issue that, of course, happens. Next slide, please. As a continuation of the changes and challenges in intimacy for the care receiver, the person with dementia may, as I mentioned, may have side effects from medications that affect the desire for intimacy. They may become more demanding and less sensitive to the needs of others. And this is also, for example, in sexual activity, right? If they have forgotten that they already had sexual activity, that there was sexual activity, but if they forget, they may become demanding. And then again, we also know that dementia can push these combative behaviors, right? So we need to understand that this is something that may happen. And of course, they may still desire physical intimacy, or completely the opposite, lose interest in it. And they may no longer know what to do or even how to express their need for intimacy. We'll talk a little bit more about this in a different slide. But again, all of these are things to consider. We want to make sure that they are being acknowledged so that we can work on it. Next slide, please. So changes in need over time. All right. This is somewhat of a general type of changes in need over time. Our need for physical and emotional closeness and how we experience intimacy, of course, changes throughout the lifespan. Some of these changes come with maturity, while others may reflect life circumstances such as a diagnosis of dementia, of course, and it could be another type of diagnosis. And as I been mentioning, communication is key to identify what is a mutually enjoyable approach to intimacy. So the level of intimacy in a relationship can vary. It varies from relationship to relationship. And of course, even with dementia, because we know it is a progressive disease, in the early stages of the disease, intimate relationships may be affected by changes in the level of emotional connection, sexual desire between the partners. While these changes are normal, and in light of both typical aging and how dementia progresses, coping with them can be very difficult. So again, making sure that we are talking to our partners to find a mutually enjoyable approach to intimacy. Now, of course, again, making sure that the person who has dementia feels safe, loved, and that they are having a caring touch, right? And again, what this means in to each couple can be very different. So making sure that we are giving and hopefully also in a way receiving affection that goes with what the relationship feels okay with, but also what dementia allows us to experience at that moment. So it is important to acknowledge all of these changes. Now, it is important to, acknowledge that there will be feelings, tough feelings, maybe of rejection, distaste, guilt. And of course, these feelings can be discussed with a professional. Again, it is important to acknowledge. We don't want to pretend that everything is easy. And of course, if you love this person, you want to do what is best for them, but it doesn't mean that it is not difficult, right? So it is important to acknowledge, but also work towards managing these feelings in a healthy way. Next slide, please. Now, something to consider: privacy. So sometimes with dementia, we can have the partners living at home with others, maybe because of how advanced the dementia is. Maybe these partners were living in assisted living communities, or the person with dementia is living there. Maybe in this community they are sharing a bedroom, bathroom. This means that there is minimal privacy. And of course, when it comes to sexual intimacy, when it comes to that bond, that partner and relationship bond, this can be a big challenge, right? So it is important to, if you are a part of the caregiving team, if you are a partner who is able to look for opportunities for privacy, that is something to consider, right? Maybe doing some transportation, going somewhere else, right? If you are someone who knows about the situation, maybe you're outside of the relationship, well, maybe you can offer the transportation, or even facilitate a sleepover dates that allow these couples to be near each other in a safe environment and to have that privacy. Well, of course, privacy and maintaining connection is very important. We, of course, depending on the condition of the person, we want to make sure that they are safe, right? So making sure that they are in a safe environment, in a safe location. If their dementia is advanced, that they're not at risk for wandering off, that maybe there's a caregiver nearby, a professional nearby, or that there is access to a medical device of some sort. Again, lots of things to consider. However, it doesn't mean that it's impossible, right? And again, it is important to acknowledge that, yes, if we are living with other people, or if the person is in an assisted living community, we might need to actively look for privacy in a way that keeps the person with dementia, the person receiving care, safe. Next slide, please. So let's go into hypersexuality in a little bit more detail, because we know that there are changed sexual behaviors in dementia. It is important to remember that at any stage, or uncharacteristic behavior is part of the illness and is not something personal. It's not something that's directed in a personal way. So the person with dementia may no longer know what to do with their sexual desire, or when or where to apply or express their desire. So again, very important to keep in mind. So some of the changes in sexual behaviors in people with dementia can include increased sexual demands. So that means that there can be unreasonable or even exhausting demands, often at odd times or inappropriate places, and even aggression if those needs are not met. So again, it's dementia. Also, there may be loss of sexual inhibitions. This can result in sexual advances towards others, undressing or fondling themselves in public, or mistaking another person for their partner. So again, something that we need to consider depending on what stage the dementia is, and also the partner's interest in sexual activity. And, it could be the opposite: diminished sexual interest. The person is withdrawn. They don't really want any physical contact from others. They don't initiate affection. So it is something that we need to learn how to manage in the relationship. So if sexual demands change, the person doing the caregiving or the partner doing the caregiving may have to keep safely out of the way until there is a mood change if the person is combative. Some partners may complain of feeling almost like an object if there is this hypersexuality. And sometimes once there has been the sexual intimacy, the partner with dementia may immediately forget that it even happened. And of course, this can leave the caregiver, bewildered, hurt, if their partner, if this happens, or even if their partner loses immediate interest after sexual activity. So again, it is important to acknowledge that hypersexuality may be something that happens to your partner when they have dementia. So what do we need to do? We need to cope, right? Coping. We need to maybe meet the emotional needs with maybe a gentle touch, hug, or other affectionate gesture. Or we can learn how to use delaying tactics. Touch in everyday routines, like hair brushing is an example. Use distraction and redirection, and of course, validation therapy. So consider all of the, when we're dealing with hypersexuality, please consider all of the reasons for the inappropriate behavior, or what we would label inappropriate behavior. These signs that we think are hypersexual, they may actually be ways of expressing themselves, that they need to use the toilet, that they're feeling discomfort of some sort, or even that they're bored. Because people with dementia may not have the ability to express that correctly. So we need to consider all the options. And of course, we can learn how to gently discourage inappropriate behavior. We can also try to remain focused on the person, not so much the behavior. And of course, I mentioned distraction, redirection, and again, the touch in the everyday routine. Touch can really be a way of making the care receiver, the partner with dementia, feel like they are safe, like they are cared for, like they are receiving love. So massage, holding hands, embracing, like I said, if there's already a routine of caregiving, maybe when there's hair brushing happening, little touch throughout the day can also bring about satisfaction in partnerships. Next slide, please. And something very important to say out loud is that people with dementia have lived with their need for intimacy longer than they have lived with dementia. So again, we are putting the individual first rather than putting the condition first, right? We're trying to understand, to remember, sometimes we forget that individual was a whole individual at one time, right? They did not have dementia. And when I say whole, I mean that, yes, they had intimacy needs, right? The relationship maybe was different. And dementia changes the person. But remember, this person lived with their need for intimacy longer than they have lived with dementia. So something to please remember when we're dealing with difficulties, right? Such as hypersexuality, or when the partners lose complete interest in intimacy. It's important to remember this. So next slide, please. So what can we do, right? What can we do with all of these changes that we've been discussing, with these behaviors, with these challenges? What can we do to really help our relationship in general? Next slide, please. Learn to accept, right? If it were only that easy as saying, I accept what is happening, it's hard to accept a lot of the times. Even for folks who are not caring for someone who has dementia, acceptance is a tough one, right? But we need to acknowledge the changes and accept the new normal. Now, sometimes I get pushback for saying accepting the new normal because people may say, well, that means that you are feeling defeated, that you've given up. But no, no, no. On the contrary, right? Understanding that the relationship is changing, that dementia is a condition that will progress, we need to accept that this is the new normal and that we need to adapt to this new normal and that we will need to continue uh, uh, the adaptation process throughout the dementia. As dementia progresses, we will also need to adapt to the new normal constantly. So it is not a defeat, but again, a way of accepting our new normal, right? Also, accepting that there are different forms of intimate expression, and this may be very challenging for some people, and it may not be as challenging for others. It really depends. But acknowledging that there are options, right? I already mentioned a few: touch, holding hands, kissing, hugging, gentle massage, gentle hair brushing. There are options, and this is going to look different for every couple. We can also engage in different activities that can bring closeness to the relationship. So maybe, a lot of people with dementia respond great with music. So maybe listening to music that you both enjoyed at a certain point in your lives, if there's a specific song, that maybe some sort of activity that continues to really nurture the relationship. Maybe also looking at photo albums. Maybe, if it's something that we feel that might benefit the person with dementia, that it won't stress them out. Maybe even singing together. And again, these activities will be different for each relationship. And also nurture your own interests, right? The acceptance also means that as a caregiver, you will not be able to handle everything at the same time, that you also need space for yourself, that you also are an individual, that you also have your own interests. And of course, you can still spend time together doing, whatever the activity is, of course, but that you also need space to recharge. As we say here, right, at taking care of the caregiver. Right? That's what it means, that you are taking care of yourself so that when you are tackling those very challenging caregiving activities, that you can do it as best as possible. So everybody is different. So this is maybe a point where you can ask yourself, what can I do? What does this look like for me? What does acceptance look like for me? And if you're writing down notes, write that question down. It can be an activity to do later on. Next slide, please. Of course, asking for help. I mentioned earlier that building your team of people who can maybe bring some respite here and there, right, in your caregiving duties. Asking for help is super important. So maybe having someone to talk to, someone you feel safe with regarding the situation. It could be friends and family, but a lot of the times we may also need the professional help, maybe counselor, maybe even a doctor, right? To really understand what is going on with the condition. Reaching out to professionals, right? And I did mention earlier, join a support group to see how others maybe in a similar situation have dealt with it. Sometimes support groups are not as widely accepted, but I do encourage you, if you're in a situation that you're kind of, you feel like you're in a box and you can't really open the box, it is something that might benefit you. So besides being accepting and being, proactive and finding other ways of intimacy, Asking for help is vital to the caregiver and the individual who is being cared for, of course, right? If the caregiver is okay, the odds of the care receiver being okay are very high. So it is important to ask for help. Next slide, please. Our ongoing um, point for today, considering ways to maintain intimacy, right? Of course, we know that now we know that dementia causes an increase in sexual interest and desire, or quite the opposite. So, finding other ways of affection, affirmation that are comfortable for both of you, companionship, courtship, and sexual relationships. So, exploring non sexual touching, share intimate moments, and try not to take, very important, try not to take changes in sexual desire personally. It's normal to feel lonely, rejected maybe at times, but again, talk to someone, seek that help and support. Next slide, please. So, things to consider. Do what feels best for you in your relationship. And if the person who has dementia is still present enough, of course, do what feels best for both of you. Try not to feel guilty if you no longer wish to be intimate with your partner. Again, finding ways to connect. Discuss this with your partner, peers, clergy, counseling professional, and understand that it's normal and it's common to feel conflicting feelings about wanting to continue your intimate relationship in light of the changes that are occurring, and knowing that there is no single approach that will work for every couple. So everybody's different. Next slide, please. So, something very important to consider, because we are talking about sexual relationships or sexuality in the relationship, consent, right? Consent is when it's a process, really. So I'm going to break it down into smaller steps, maybe hopefully making this more understandable when it comes to dementia, if you're not really familiar with consent and dementia. So consent is a process in which we understand relevant information when it comes to taking a decision. So whatever information is relevant to taking a decision, we understand it. Then the next step is that we actually retain the information long enough for us to be able to make a decision. Of course, we are able to weigh the pros, the cons of us making that decision. And then we communicate the decision by any possible means. It could be verbal, it could be using sign language, or using single movements, such as, we have a code for if I squeeze your hand once, that's a yes. If it's twice, then that's a no. Again, as long as we're able to communicate it, it doesn't have to be verbal in this case all of the time. So if the person with dementia can do all of these steps, they are able to consent. If they are not able to do one or more of these due to their impairment, due to the dementia, then they would lack the capacity to make that decision. At that time, because dementia, especially in its early ages, it may not be something that is ongoing 24 hours a day. Of course, we know that the dementia is there, but people have moments of clarity, right? So maybe if there is a moment of clarity and they are going through the consent process, they may be able to go through all of these steps. But maybe they're having a moment where they are not having a moment of clarity, and maybe they cannot do one of these steps. Then consent has not been given, right? So it is very important to understand that both partners must give their consent for sexual intimacy. And of course, with dementia, consent can change gradually and even from day to day, from moment to moment. So very important to consider consent as part of the relationship. Next slide, please. And of course, having a positive outlook on life, focusing on the positive, understanding what is the purpose in life, right? What is your purpose in life? What was maybe the purpose in life for the relationship, and how has that changed? Also, satisfaction. Satisfaction can be found in many different ways. So maybe, finding new ways of feeling that satisfaction that maybe weren't there in the past. And also focusing on those feel good feelings. It's very easy when we're doing caregiving from day to day that we will focus on the stress, on the grief, on the negative, on the burnout from doing all of these caregiving activities. But try to focus on those feel good feelings like love, serenity, happiness, whatever that means to you. Try to cling to those feelings as much as possible. Next slide, please. And it's important to remember that it's not always about sex. It's not always about the sexual relationship in the relationship. Sometimes the best type of intimacy is where you are just together. Maybe you share a moment, maybe you laugh, you hold each other, you enjoy each other's company. So again, maybe this will require learning different things, adjusting, but remembering that it is possible to have the harmony of intimacy and dementia with a partner, a spouse. Next slide, please. So, of course, I always like to let you know about the services that Southern Caregiver Resource Center has for family caregivers. And of course, I touched upon quite a few today here. We have professionals, master level professionals that are paired up with family caregivers. These are family consultants, and they create an individualized caregiver plan. We have support groups. I mentioned those throughout the presentation today. We have support groups that are led by a professional counselor. We also have individual counseling. Maybe in your journey as a caregiver for a spouse or a partner, maybe you feel that speaking in a support group is not necessarily something you feel comfortable with at the moment. So maybe you need that individual counseling to discuss these changes in sexuality, right? How am I going to learn about what I can do to cope with these changes? So we have individual counseling available. We also have legal and financial consultation, a lot of education available, like the live stream that we're doing today. We have a large variety of topics that we discuss. We also have our TLC and our Calma programs. These are evidence-based and culturally adaptive programs that help family caregivers who are helping or who are caring for someone who has Alzheimer's, memory loss, or another form of dementia to learn about the condition, but also to find these coping strategies. What works for you to help you cope in your role as the caregiver? So again, our TLC and our Calma program are available. TLC is in English, Calma is in Spanish, and they are available in person or virtual. We have specialized information in person in our offices and also virtually through our website. And we have respite options that are temporary support for the caregiver, and it's needs-based, it's temporary. So if you find that you could use any of these services, then maybe today's presentation really brought out something, feel free to reach out to us. Next slide, please. And of course, I mentioned that we have a lot of information on our website. There is a section called iCare Portal at our website, which is www.caregivercenter.org, where we have our caregiver corner, where you can find, like I said, all of these live stream videos. We also have a podcast called Let's Talk Caregiving. It's released once a month, and really the host Marta and Roberto talk to a variety of people, professionals, family caregivers, and all, of course, in the topic of caregiving, right? So if you listen to podcasts, you can find our podcast anywhere where you download yours. We also have a lot of different classes. And then, of course, our digital newsletter. We have our newsletter called Wavelengths. You can sign up on our website, and this is the best way to really stay updated with Southern Caregiver Resource Center, know what we're up to, what news and events are happening, and of course, useful resources that we offer. Next slide, please. And of course, you can follow us on our social media. You can connect with us via Facebook. Maybe you are watching us on Facebook right now. You can also connect with us via Instagram, where we have a segment in Spanish where we talk to family caregivers and they share their experiences. It's called Charla, Café y Cuidadores. And again, this is through our Instagram. You can also connect with us via LinkedIn, YouTube. Of course, you may be watching us via YouTube right now. And again, our podcast, wherever you download your podcast. Next slide, please. So here is our contact information. Please, if you have any questions, if you want to access our services, you can do that through our website, www.caregivercenter.org, or you can also call us toll-free, 800-827-1008, or our regular phone number is 858-268-4432. And we are available to answer your phone call Monday through Friday, 8 in the morning to 5 in the afternoon. If you call outside our service hours or maybe during a holiday, please leave a message. We will get back to you. Again, otherwise, you can, of course, contact us via our website. So I want to take this moment to thank you very much for watching this live stream presentation, and I'll see you next time. Take care.